Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hi, this is Zoe Routh, your friendly neighborhood leadership expert. I like to consider myself as an intrepid explorer of the leadership landscape. How do you like that as a new tagline? I've been playing with that as I do a whole bunch of new branding work, coinciding with the tail end development of my latest piece of literature, my first novel called The Olympus Project. And we're still a couple months away from actually getting it out into the market, but we're down to the nitty gritty. So how are we going to promote it? How are we going to describe it? How do I describe myself? And it can be a torturous thing. I think your identity and your leadership are really interlinked. And it's one of the questions we explore in today's interview. How was that as a segue? I hope you liked it. The question that I started with today is, how do we motivate hybrid remote working teams? And where we got to in the interview was well beyond that. My guest today is Marty Strong. He is a retired Navy SEAL officer and combat veteran, 20 years in the U.S. Navy SEALs. He is also a novelist, which had me go, wow, yay, that's really interesting. And he is also a practicing CEO and chief strategy officer, and now an author of his first nonfiction book, Be Nimble, How the Creative Navy SEAL Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business. So our conversation is fairly wide-ranging. We talk about his experience in the SEALs and how that led to his experience in business, the differences in attitudes and approach, and how we can extract some of the lessons from the Navy SEALs and apply that to a workplace context. In particular, how we build teams and how we can actually motivate individuals. And then we moved on towards the end of the interview to talk about war, what causes conflict, how we can actually do leadership better to prevent some of the devastation that can come from people who exercise evil in the world. So, like I said, broad-ranging interview and heaps of great stuff ahead. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's get on with the show. Well, all the way from Virginia Beach, Virginia, welcome to the show, Marty Strong.
Thanks for having me, Zoe. How you doing?
Oh, I'm so good. I've been looking forward to this interview. I have a secret, well, maybe it's not so secret, private public obsession with all things U.S. Navy SEALs. So I was like, oh, yes, I definitely want to interview Marty. We won't spend the entire time waxing lyrical about the SEALs, of course, because you are far more complex than that one single thing in your life, even though it is an amazing, amazing story that you've told. So that was just a personal confession. We are here to talk about leadership, nimble leadership, your books and your novels, which I'm also excited to talk to you about. But before we get into all that, what's your story? How did you end up doing what you're doing now? So you've been a very successful businessman following your Navy SEALs journey and now a published author and consultant. So let's rewind a little bit. How did you get to where you are now?
Sure. The bumper sticker version is I was born in the center of the United States in the state of Nebraska, way out in the western part of the state where all the prairie land is and everything. And moved to Omaha, Nebraska, which is the biggest city in Nebraska. Left there to live in Japan for 4 years. As a teenager, my father was working for the U.S. government. And then my parents got divorced. I went back to Nebraska with my mom. And about a year later, she and I had a falling out. So I flew to live with my dad, who by then had been reassigned to Honolulu, Hawaii. So then I lived in Hawaii. And then he was reassigned a year later to Detroit, Michigan. So I ended up in 4 different places in 4 different schools for 4 different years of high school. And then I joined the Navy at 17. So a lot of misdirection there, but a lot of exposure to a lot of different cultures within the United States and starting over with friends and things, which I think gave me some resilience later on for change and adapting and all that. So I get into the Navy. I go through air traffic control and radar school. And then through a mix-up in orders, I end up at SEAL training in California.
Wait. How do you mix up in orders and you end up at Navy SEAL training?
Yeah,
How does that even happen?
I took a time swimming test in the pool when I was in Navy boot camp. And the point of it was to be on a competitive team within boot camp for a competition one weekend. But they had some other things they wanted me to do, and they took my name, my social security number, and that was it. So it took me a couple years to figure it out. Actually, it took me almost 8 years when I went back to being an instructor at the SEAL course, and I looked at my records and I started putting it all together. That swim test, along with a few other things I did, was actually the SEAL prep test, and if you passed it, then you got orders to SEAL team, at least to SEAL training. So for whatever reason, those orders overrode the orders coming out of my radar air traffic control school, and that's where I was sent. So I thought it was a mix-up in orders. I talked to a master chief, and he said, yeah, it's a mix-up in orders. You shouldn't be here. We're not allowed to recruit from your group within the Navy. And then he talked me into staying and just trying it out. And 20 years later, I retired. So I'd spent 20 years as a SEAL, 10 as an enlisted SEAL and 10 as an officer. And got my undergraduate and graduate degree in business management, and then went into money management with one company in Baltimore for 2 years, and then went to United Bank of Switzerland as a portfolio manager. So all in about 7.5 years doing that. And then left that and did a little bit of consulting, then got into government contracting as a leader, managing divisions and departments and helping to grow a couple of sub companies. So that kind of takes me to the company I'm with now. I've been, the president or the CEO of the entity I lead right now for 12 years. And this will be my 13th year in 22. And it started as a very small company, and we built it up, and we split it into 4 separate companies. And eventually me and the co-owner sold it to the employees. They have a structure in the United States that employees can own the company. And I stayed on after that, and I'm still there. So basically, I've got a healthcare entity primarily, and a government contracting company, and they're 2 totally separate kinds of businesses, but all in about 600 or so employees scattered across all that. And I'm in charge of a management holding group at the top. It's kind of a separate entity that provides strategic guidance.
Wow. So that's quite an extraordinary success in both fields of, U.S. Navy SEALs, and then in business at the top of the tree in both those areas. I'm curious about, 20 years of service in SEALs and then going into business. It's 2 different planets, I would imagine. What did you notice about leaving the SEALs that was different about business, and what was the same?
Sure. And appropriately, the book Being Nimble talks a lot about what does convey from the Navy and from the SEAL teams as far as leadership of people, organizations, et cetera, over to the commercial, non-military side, non-government side. I didn't actually experience the leadership issue right up front. What I experienced when I transitioned out was what a lot of veterans feel. You are in a very tight group of people. Everybody's trained the same. Taxpayer dollars have made sure that you know your job. There's very few people that are incompetent. Almost nobody's incompetent. And if they are, they just get trained more until they're competent. So that system kind of gives you a false impression of the real world. Because, if you lose somebody, say somebody breaks a leg, whatever, I just walked down the hallway and said, I need a new, whatever the specialty was. And they'd go, okay. And a couple minutes later, some guy would walk down and say, hi, I'm reporting to you now. Boom, just like that. I didn't have to recruit. I didn't have to interview. I didn't have to train. I didn't have to do anything. And they were motivated, and they cared about the mission. They cared about the organization, the team. They were easier to lead in some ways and more difficult to lead in others because they were so independently minded and all that. I get out in the civilian world, and that's not the case. A lot of companies don't care about training or mentoring or coaching any of their employees. You basically show up with what you got, and that's it. And if the company grows and changes and morphs, you're just kind of left behind. If you independently try to keep up through self-study or something, good on you. Maybe you keep pace. That was weird to me that you just, did that to people. In the SEAL teams and in the military in general, you train your successors, you train your replacements, because in combat, you could be replaced, very suddenly. So you want to have other people who can step up and do your job and not have the whole thing collapse. In the commercial world, you would never happily train your replacement as just a normal thing to do because you don't want to be replaced. There's job security issues, there's competition, there's a lot of things. So I didn't even realize that existed because I joined the Navy when I was 17. I worked at odd jobs, but I'd never worked in any kind of corporate environment. That was the first big shock. The second shock was that once I started learning how to manage money and was managing money, I found that the thing that helped me build my business as a money manager was all my leadership skills from the SEAL teams. It had nothing to do with my degrees. It had nothing to do with, business math or statistical analysis or any of that. It had to do with looking at somebody straight in the face when they're telling you why they're worried about their money or what they're trying to do for their family, whatever, and making them feel comfortable and giving them a plan and then leading them down that road with that plan. And if they felt uncomfortable because something happened in the market or whatever, you were there, not so much to hold their hand, but to reinforce the plan, reinforce the integrity of what we put together. And that turned out to be a leadership function, oddly enough. So those were the kind of the two things right off the bat. One, I didn't have any clue that would be something I could flip over from my military experience that would have a good effect and a big effect on my business. And I also was completely shocked at the way companies treated employees and just didn't seem to care about making the team any stronger or the company any stronger through their labor force.
Is that something that you addressed or tried to change as you moved into leadership positions in the corporate world?
I did after leaving UBS, because there's not I had clients and I had a couple of people working in the office, but it wasn't like I had a big team and a division, a department or anything like that. Once I started getting into larger companies, I did. And one of the things that also kind of conveys from the SEAL teams, you can call it bench strength or resiliency and depth or redundancy. In the SEAL teams, everybody cross-trains in every skill set. Everybody's good. An expert in one, close to being an expert in a second one, and the third one, they're at an apprentice level. And that's because somebody might get hurt or worse, and everybody can kind of step up and know somebody else's job. That kind of cross-training wasn't, I didn't see it very often in companies, either when I was analyzing them or later on when I was in companies as a leader. So that's something as a leader I felt I could do, and I did it every chance I was authorized to do that, as much as I could within the resources given me. I did a lot of the training myself. I would bring people in a room. The people I work with now call it Marty Draw, like Mardi Gras. It's a party. So I'm very visual. I do everything on dry erase boards. I do a lot of facilitation to pull things out of people. I did something this morning to walk somebody through a whole bunch of accountants through the entire process of the government company and how we target business, how it aligns with our strategy, and then all the way through how we bake the bread to the very end. Because they were just touching bits and pieces of it. They didn't understand how, nobody had ever lifted the hood and showed it to them. So that's the kind of stuff. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't always have to be the top leader doing it. It could be the top leader insisting that other leaders do it. And you have to make it a discipline within the organization and a requirement of your leaders to do that on a regular basis, and then hold them accountable if they aren't. Because I've found even if I feel that way, it doesn't mean that it conveys and everybody below me in the next leadership level is vigorously training and, exposing people to the cross-training experience. So anyway, that was something I was able to build on, and it was from the Navy experience more than anything else.
I think that's such a sensible thing to do, like building redundancy in your systems, your human systems, as well as your other systems, is critical for being able to be nimble, as you say in your book. You've got to have the resources to tap into. And I think the COVID experience has really emphasized that. I think COVID went through the lockdowns, sort of ripped off a lot of false skins on things. And if you had weaknesses in your businesses and your relationships, actually, those got revealed pretty quickly. And when you have people able to step in for one another, that makes a huge, huge difference. I'm also curious about camaraderie. So SEALs is pretty intense experience. and you work right alongside your mates and you die for each other, willingly would step in and jump on a grenade, as they say. You kind of don't have that in corporate world, or do you?
I think there's a lot of family businesses, and these are not dysfunctional families. These are functional families that actually love each other and care about each other. And there are family businesses that have that kind of high level of emotional intensity and commitment to each other. Obviously, you're going to be required to jump on a grenade, but you might do something close to that metaphorically. You might hawk your house to try to keep the company solvent for a short period of time, or I don't know, do something that would as a sacrifice that for the benefit of the greater good of the family. And there are some small businesses that create a family-like experience with that same kind of dynamic, that same kind of intensity. And that's leadership. I mean, if you're not family, there's no other reason to feel that way. And you get other people to really feel like they don't want to let you down and they don't want to let the team down or each other down. That's essentially the same thing you establish in the military. And in the elite units, you establish it as a prerequisite because there's only going to be, in the SEALs, SAS, any of these, you're only going out with a few guys. It's not like you're going out with, 10,000 guys. And if you screw up, well, there's a couple thousand guys that are going to back you up and cover what you didn't do right. If you go out there with 6 guys or 2 guys or 4 guys, it's all on you. And you know that. And you don't want to let the people to the left and right of you down in any way, shape, or form. So there's a lot more weight on you, but that's the same thing in a small business. Or it's the same thing in a business that has a very small leadership team. And if it's a dynamic business, like you said, COVID, if speed or an external black swan event like the pandemic rattles business models. So if you start to speed up a business model, I always use the metaphor, the wheels start to wobble and you realize the platform is not designed to move at this speed. It could be for a lot of reasons, but if you're moving this fast because maybe you got great opportunities and so you just accelerate, let's grab everything, and then you can't scale and your people can't ramp up and you start to fall apart. So the same thing happens, say, with COVID and the pandemic comes in. It challenges your business platform. It challenges your status quo. If you can't, stop, look at each other and say, okay, we're in the middle of something that we have to deal with and let's deal with it together, then what's going to happen is whatever that is going to blow you apart, as you mentioned before. The fractures that were there are going to be emphasized, and any kind of rifts that are there are going to be widened, and failure to communicate is going to be accelerated. So it's weird. It's an explosion if it's not a solid team when an internal or an external event happens like that. Or it's kind of a magnetism that pulls everybody together if they've got the right kind of point of view as a team under the same circumstances. And you can look at 2 different groups, and they do 2 different things. They react 2 different ways.
So what is the right point of view? What is the difference between a team that pulls together and pulls off surviving a crisis like that? What is the right stuff? What's the right approach, the right ingredients to build that?
Well, the first thing is everybody has to have a mission focus, whatever the mission is. I mean, if you're in an ER, it's all about saving the lives coming in the door. Everybody has to agree that that's the paramount point of the exercise. If everybody doesn't agree, then right off the bat, you're not going to have alignment of purpose. The second thing is you have to have a certain amount of humility, and that humility allows you to see yourself not as the most important cog in the machine. That also allows you to see the importance of the other people, what value they're providing to the enterprise. And if you're a leader, you try to exercise the team. I don't care what the team is. It could be a leadership group. It could be a bunch of graphic artists, whatever it is. You try to exercise them to watch them in motion, watch them interact, and then figure out ways to get that harmony, get that humility, and make sure everybody's focused on the same purpose. Because if the leader doesn't do that, then you're just hoping that they all just kind of gel accidentally, like a band that just kind of comes together. And, hey, wow, we sound really good together. Let's be a band. That's a rare thing. Usually there's a leader, even in a band, who knows who sounds good, who doesn't, who's playing by the rules, who's hitting the notes, who's coming into work and practicing to get better and committed. And you need the same thing in an organization.
I'm curious about that. So the harmony piece, the way that you've just described it, is harmonization of skills and focus. What do you think about harmonization in terms of liking each other and that kind of emotional connection? So when you say harmonize, can you tease that out a little bit more?
Sure. Multi-level of harmonization. So you have to have communication styles that don't have to be exactly the same, but they have to be compatible. If somebody's a listener and somebody's a person that throws ideas out all the time, that's compatible. If you have two people that are constantly throwing ideas at each other, neither of them are listeners, that's not compatible. Intellectual humility is important, which I mentioned before. You have to have an open mind. If you don't have an open mind, then everybody's going to get stuck at some point because somebody's not going to want to look at the new material, the new data, whatever. The emotional intelligence. Maturity is the way we used to label emotional intelligence, but the ability to see things and not overreact, to see and look at people's facial expressions and the tone to realize that they're either upset or concerned. It's an empathy because you are a mature person and have that emotional intelligence. These are all things that in any endeavor with human beings are all great positives. You can get all that stuff lined up in a marriage or in a business partnership or in a large organization. It'd be a great place to be, a great place to work. But it's the leader's responsibility to try to strive for that harmony. And part of it is by putting the team together. If you don't have that choice, if you just get plopped in there and you kind of have the luck of the draw, well, then you can still work on it. And it may not be perfect, but you have something to aspire to.
So I think the elements that you singled out there, so compatible communication style. So you could work on how we communicate. You can talk about having an open mind, and there's techniques for that. So it's like ask questions, don't provide answers. And the emotional intelligence about listening and caring about what other people are saying and managing your own emotional stuff. Those are all trainable, executable things. I'm also curious about what about getting to know each other as humans, getting to know that Marty has a dog and you call her Esmeralda or whatever. Like, is that an important element of teamwork, or is that just like icing on the cake or a byline?
Her name's Irish. She's a 10-pound Yorkie poo.
I didn't even know you had a dog.
Oh, yeah. So I think it's a little bit different now in the United States. There was a time when everybody, for whatever reason, stayed and kind of entertained and went to restaurants all in a very small local area, almost like a village environment. Even within a city, people that grew up in Brooklyn, in New York City, they didn't go outside of Brooklyn. They hung out in Brooklyn. So if you came out of your workplace, you were going to bump into the same people on the street. You're going to bump into them at school. You're going to bump into them in the park, walking the dog. So there was a lot of opportunities for that because it would be weird to just ignore that you're bumping into these people you work with. It seems now, in this country anyway, everybody lives, because they have the freedom to, and they've got cars and the roads are there. They may live 15 miles away. They may be traveling, 35 minutes every day to get into work, and you never get a chance to see them anywhere else except for the office. And I think that closes off what you're suggesting is you can have a kind of a social interaction. You can know things about people if they're willing to volunteer it. I don't know if it's in the SEAL teams. We sat so many times in planes, boats, trains, submarines, out in the middle of nowhere on a desert dune. We knew everything about each other. I mean, we knew everything about each other because we just didn't know what to do with our time. So we just started telling each other about our lives and stuff. In a workplace, at least at our workplace, especially now with COVID, we went from having, about 54 people in my management headquarters team for these different companies, all in one 12,000 foot square space, all open space. So I was out in the population with everybody else in a desk. I could walk around, talk, how's it going? What'd you do this weekend? And I did it all the time. Just checking the pulse, seeing how people were feeling. And they were very comfortable with me doing that because that's the way I've always been. Unless they were a new hire, then they were a little weirded out that the CEO came over and asked them how they were doing. They'd go to somebody and say, what did that mean? But then March of 2020, I had to send everybody home. And I went in there and it was like a science fiction movie, like I was on a spaceship floating in space. It'd just be me and 12,000 square feet of empty space. And we slowly brought people back, mostly finance people, but as of right now, only about 12 people need to work in that office. So I've shrunk that office down since then. And now if I see anybody, I'm seeing them this way. I'm seeing them through, the visual media of Zoom or some other conference technology. And that's made it even worse because we've had a lot of new hires in the last 2 years. I've never met them, and when you get in this format, everybody tends to be very stiff and very formal for whatever reason, because they're on, they sit there for a 30-minute meeting and they just stare at stare at the screen, and it's hard to loosen up. It's hard to get them to, I guess, open about that kind of stuff. So that's a long way of saying that, at least here in this country, it seems to be very difficult to go much beyond a certain veil. And I think part of it's because of the physical disbursement of everybody, even before COVID, geographically within a city.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a lot of what people are bemoaning in remote hybrid working environments. Like, you lose that sense of intimacy and connection. And one extreme, you have complete immersion with your colleagues, and it's something like the Navy SEAL team, to the complete opposite end of that, where everybody's just dialing in remotely and there's no proximity. And proximity does lend itself to building intimacy because you're spending a lot of time with one another, as you said. Do you think this is something that, so speaking to leaders who are leading remote teams or hybrid remote teams, is this something that we need to address? Is this something that we need to actively try and facilitate, or just say, this is just the way it is now?
I think there's two things that kind of interfere with that, if things going back the way they were, so to speak. One is any real fear still of COVID. We restrict people wanting to come back in. And in our country, we couldn't order them back in. We couldn't just say, you will come in or else. So the other thing is, a lot of them have gotten used to and like working from home. They like doing the compressed work. I mean, they're knowledge workers for the most part. So they're working off of, cloud-based systems. They get up at 4:00 in the morning. They work straight through hard for 3.5 hours. And they've got the rest of the day to themselves because they've hit all their to-dos. And to come in and just sit there in the old classic, 3 to 4 hours, go to lunch, 3 hours, leave. There are a lot of people that don't want to do that anymore. Now, maybe it's because the technology has enabled knowledge workers to be isolated and still be productive, and they can be, you can see what they're doing, their productivity. And because a lot of knowledge workers and technical workers like to work, on their own little projects, they're not necessarily want to work in a big pile of people all day. They're happy. They're really happy with this change. From my standpoint, I think creatives, they're the ones having the difficulty, because being around people, it stimulates creativity. If you look at all the great writers, all the great poets and even the great artists, a lot of them hung out together in tea houses and bars, in each other's houses. The famous thing about Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, how she sat there and listened to all these great writers coming into her home, and then she just said, I'm going to write something. It's a stimulating thing to have other intelligent people or creative people just throwing out a bunch of crazy stuff. And it sparks ideas. And so that part, the creativity part, and it can be business. You could be designing a new software or something. That's still creativity. That's the part I think is going to be negatively impacted if we don't figure out a way to get those people that are doing those particular functions back in close contact with each other, even if it's for a limited time. But you have to get them into kind of the crucible of ideas, and you have to let them, bang around a little bit and argue with each other and laugh and laugh at the right time, because they can actually see the body language and realize it was funny. So I don't think it's going to be everybody. I think it's going to be clear to everybody that a certain group of people doing a certain function, mostly in the creative side, are going to be less creative if they are isolated through something like, the medium of a video call.
Okay. So on that question, I know that there is value in getting people together, especially in the creative endeavors. I was curious about the getting to know each other part. Is this something like build relationships that are personal? Do you think this is an important thing that we need to address, or we just have to suck it up and deal with it?
I think you have to kind of honor everybody's boundaries. And there are some people that are very open. Again, if you're face to face, you can tell in 10 seconds. They seem to be fine exchanging information and where are you from, and they ask questions. And if they ask a question, then I can ask a question. Next thing you know, you've exchanged some information about each other, and that opens up the dialogue for the next time you bump into each other. And then there's other people, they're very tight-lipped. They don't really want to tell you anything about themselves. So I wouldn't make it a requirement or a prerequisite of leadership that you had to try to establish that as a goal, that you must know, what Susie or Bob's dog's name is, because, you're a bad leader if you don't. Because I think everybody has to allow you to in that door. And it's a personal choice for an employee. I don't think it's a prerequisite or a requirement.
Interesting. Yeah. I think I lean more on I need to know and care about the people that I work with. So a bit more on that sort of stuff. But I think your point about it's up to the person on the receiving end how much they let you in. Yeah, really interesting. And would it be the same in the SEAL teams as well? Like some people connect more than others and some people are more reserved?
Yep. It's cliche in most war movies. There's always the crazy loud guy. There's the funny guy. There's the quiet guy. That's cliche, but it's actually reality because that's all people are made up in different ways. And there are very intense people that never even say a word. I mean, they're intense, motivated, driven, and they don't say a word. There are others that are less intense and motivated and talk all the time. So it's the same thing in the SEAL teams. You get that whole, the whole gambit of personalities and the way those personalities express themselves. And oddly enough, in combat, some of those personalities change.
Yeah, right.
That's a funny thing to see, or interesting thing to see, where the quiet guy suddenly becomes the guy who's coming up to you and saying, "What do you need now? What do you need now? Let's go. Let's make this happen." And the guy that was talking all the time, and so suddenly he's the quiet guy. So
yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's the bombast and all that is an expression of a personality, but sometimes it doesn't tell you everything about the person. Sometimes a threat or risk gets you closer to the real personality, the real core of the person, especially in a combat unit.
Interesting. I'm curious also about leadership and identity. So what have you noticed about your identity as a leader or as a human even from what you did in the SEALs and then moving out of that into corporate world? Did you feel a loss of identity or a gaining of identity, or it wasn't even an issue for you as you went from one universe to the other?
I think as an officer in the SEAL teams, for the people that I led, I felt like they knew me really, really well. I felt like my identity as a leader was both positional authority, rank, but also respect and knowledge of exactly how I was going to perform. They knew me well. They knew how I led, what kind of decisions I made, what kind of analysis and thought I put into things. They knew I asked a lot of opinions and gathered a lot of information. So I was a known entity. To people above me in the rank structure, you had to put on a different face. You had to be a lot more formal. You had to present things in a very, very straightforward way. You didn't have much time with senior officers to get them to know you very well, to respect you, because they'd seen you multiple times. They only see you maybe twice a year. In business, it's more fun for me when I'm building something or fixing something and I'm down in the trenches, because it's a lot more like the SEAL teams. The interaction between me and the people that I'm leading, it results in everything I said that I experienced with my men that I led in the SEAL teams. But as I would move up in the organizations, or the organizations got bigger, I started getting into that other mode where the people I reported to wanted more formal, they wanted everything communicated through a PowerPoint, or they wanted everything communicated within a 10-minute explanation. They didn't want to hear about all the facets of the issue or the problem. They just wanted to hear about the one they asked about, period, the end. And that really, that stifles communication and exchange of information. In my case, I realized I was turning into the same thing I was in the military, where I had to be two different kinds of leaders. One was kind of the downward and inward reflection that I was more comfortable with, being me. And then the other one had to be this formal kind of expression. I mean, I have a board of directors. I can't sit at the board of directors and talk with them and interact with them the same way I interact with the people in my office every day, because they're there to do a job. They're in formal positions of oversight, and it's a strict kind of agenda that we go through, and there's minutes and all that stuff. It's a different environment. So I think anybody that's leading would understand what I'm talking about. You can't really be the same exact person, the same identity all the time in every direction. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do with the population that you're trying to influence or guide or lead. That whatever resonates and works.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely observation about contextual identity in leadership. I'm curious about motivation. Like, one of the things you mentioned about the differences in the SEALs and corporate is that people in the SEALs are highly motivated and pumped to be doing what they're doing, and not necessarily so in corporate. a lot of leaders now who are dealing with hybrid teams in particular, like, how do I get people motivated, especially the ones who don't necessarily like working in a virtual environment or a hybrid environment? What is the secret sauce, if there is one, to motivating people?
Well, the mission focus thing is very, very important. Nobody in the SEAL teams does what they do or puts their life on the line for a paycheck. Not at all. Nobody even thinks about that. Nobody thinks about how much money I'm making, or then they don't think about, in the military, you just continue to breathe and you hit certain annual marks. And once you get to a certain point, they promote you. So, and you get paid the same amount as the worst. Say you're a lieutenant. If you're the best lieutenant in the Navy, you're getting paid exactly the same as the worst lieutenant in the Navy. There's no merit distinction at all. It's a very, orchestrated, bureaucratic kind of a thing. And it's not usually a lot of money compared to the risk you're taking and the skills that you acquire. On the outside, because there isn't that same mission focus, there's not everybody in an organization, let's say everybody in Nike or everybody in Microsoft is 100% committed to Microsoft's strategy and winning against their competitors. So if that's not there, then you don't have that intrinsic kind of passion to coordinate your efforts and resources and basically push towards the objective, right? Push towards the hill, push towards the goal, the bullseye, whatever it is. So then what do you do? If that's how that's how SEALs are motivated, and that's how, say, certain small teams in family businesses or small businesses with good teams are motivated, then you're only left with basically money. You have to come up with some other value system that's different than I just care so much. And that's why, you have nonprofits and charities, and people are working extremely hard and they're doing incredible things. And it's not for the money. It's because they believe in the mission. They believe in the outcome. So motivating a human being is easier if they're passionate and in agreement with you about the objective and the mission, and they want to get there just like you do. Because then money's not an issue. It's just mostly what can we all do together to make it happen. If you're left with money, it's a sad place to be left with as a leader, because, I think education, upward mobility, those kinds of things are more valuable in the long term, I think, to management. It sounds a little patriarchal, but, you may say you want a $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 raise, but I know that if I put you through $3,000 worth of certification in something, that in 2 years, I'm going to be able to advance you $80,000 in your salary. Because, but you're not thinking that way. You're thinking immediate gratification. What's the scoreboard say? I'm being paid compared to my peers where I think I should be. Or you're just thinking, I want to buy a house or I want to buy a new car. I need this much money. And if I don't get that much money, I'm not a motivated person anymore. So you have to give me that money or I'm leaving. That's a difficult trap for leaders to get into. And there'll never be enough money if that's the only way you can motivate people.
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think, so I'm having a conversation tomorrow with an organization which has very disparate, it's a government agency and they have lots of different departments who are very different functions. And where's the unifying theme to help galvanize the troops to help them collaborate more? I think that's what we're working towards tomorrow. Like, what's the common vision, the common mission? What are we here to actually achieve? Even if you're working in Division A and I'm working in Division B, our jobs are quite different. There's an overarching theme towards it. I want to ask about conflict, like war, because we're at the time of this recording, there is a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And having worked in war for 20 years, you've seen all sorts of drivers in war. One piece of thinking I've been doing around what causes war is it comes down to differences of beliefs, sets of values and sets of beliefs. Is this something that was consciously aware of in the leadership in the SEAL teams? Is that something that you were aware of, what drives war? Or, having been in war, what do you think drives war?
I think most people that have been in combat, I don't care what country you served under, what flag you served under, would tell you that once you see it, you believe that there's truly something that you would call evil in people, an intrinsic and thankfully uncommon, but still common enough to bad, in a bad way, ability to harm, ability to destroy, sometimes for no good reason, sometimes for very specific self-serving reasons. And that could be three teenagers in the middle of Africa going up and just killing somebody for their shoes, or that can be the head of a country like Putin. They're human beings. It's all about human beings. So when you go to these countries and you see this, how could anybody treat their own people this way, or how could people just treat their neighbors this way, or how could anybody just go in and rob indiscriminately and do all the damage that they would do in some of the countries I've been in. First, you go through all these different phases. The phases of grief. You're in denial, and then you eventually get to an acceptance. And it's a sad acceptance, which also makes it very, very happy when you get back to, a democratic or free country, because at least with all the problems those countries have, you usually don't have people just walking down the street shooting somebody and getting away with it or taking all their stuff, and you don't have, one state invading the other state and taking all their stuff. But that's only a couple of places around the world that are that stable and kind of act as a safe haven. Most other places, everybody's trying to grab something they don't have. So the goal may seem like it's a chess game goal, but the actions that you take against other human beings is evil. Because if you have to kill a bunch of people or destroy their homes or maim them to get whatever your economic goal is, or to accomplish whatever you think your geographic goal is, you can't run away from the fact that what you just did was exercise evil. Now, the other side of that coin is goodness, and you see that all the time too. In these same places, you see people that are caring and wonderful, and they give the shirt off their back, and that's all they have left. I mean, incredible expressions and examples of giving and caring and selflessness. And so both of those things exist out there. It's part of human nature. Thankfully, there's not as many that are willing to exercise evil to get what they want to get in life, or as a nation to get what they want to get as a nation. But I think you're seeing some of that in the Ukraine, the way things are panning out here. I think it's an acting out of a falsely wrapped narrative to make the people in Russia feel comfortable with the evil, which I don't think they're very comfortable with it. I think they've got enough information through social media to figure out what's going on compared to what they were told. And then anything, the means justify the ends. If we're going to go in there, we're going to, overthrow the quote unquote Nazi regime in Ukraine, or we're going to go in and grab back all the turf that used to be part of the old Russian imperial geography, or whatever their justification is, the ends justify the means, then, and if those means are to destroy people and cities and all that, that's evil. And it's pretty cut and dry if you've actually been out there and you've seen it. And that's just hard to explain to people when you come back, because most people, thankfully, haven't been exposed to that level of crazy. So, and then when it happens on the world stage, none of us want to believe it, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't fit in our worldview.
Well, we've been blessed with many, many years of world peace generally. The levels of conflict have been going down the world, and to see a major power move against a peaceful nation is shocking, and none of us expected. It feels like a regression of humanity at this point. That's the way I'm experiencing it. It's interesting, your observation, good versus evil. I'm curious whether or not you think what drives that, or what allows that evil to emerge. Is it simply down to the individual human, or is it conditions around them? That's probably part one question. Part two of the question is, what can we do to anesthetize it? Is there anything we can do to prevent that from happening?
I believe that there has to be a culture, a society that allows a certain level of evil to exist so it can be cultivated to a high level. And then once it's cultivated to a high level in a person that achieves some level of authority, because it's allowed in that society, that person at that level of authority can deputize and marshal other people that are like-minded. They're willing to do whatever they feel needs to be done to get the job done, as evil as it may get. And the reverse of that, if you're in an environment, a culture, a society where that type of behavior is frowned upon, or it's regulated through laws, or it's muted, and those kinds of people don't rise to the top and never get into a position of authority, you never see the evolution of somebody who has power and evil simultaneously. and a lot of people willing to jump in there because they agree with that method of getting what you want. So that's why if you have a country where everything's falling apart and the culture doesn't have any coherency and the society doesn't have any mores or ethical code or laws that control and contain that kind of behavior, you've basically set up a petri dish for it. And at some point, like the collapse of Germany after World War I gave rise to a lot of crazy guys that eventually found other crazy guys. And they got in rooms and drank beer and said, let's do crazy stuff. And next thing you know, you had, Nazi Germany. So that's usually how it happens. And, there was a theory, the United States at some point believed this in the 60s and 70s, that through humanitarian aid and through economic aid that you could, and through assistance with teaching countries how to do governance and how to teach countries how to set up their legal systems and all that you would kind of eliminate those cultures that were festering. And you'd start, reducing the probability that somebody would rise to the top and take over a country and turn a country into a pariah. And I think that's probably works. But once in a while, somebody still makes it to the top. And unfortunately, and that's been throughout history. There's always been somebody that pops up out of nowhere. And again, unfortunately, there are a lot of examples where people misread the evil because they hadn't seen evil in a couple of centuries, real evil. And then they just watched somebody start rolling all over a continent. And it took them a while to figure out, oh my God, this is real. And then usually the adversary had a head of steam that had to be beaten back over a longer period of time at a much, much greater cost. So I hope that's not what we're seeing right now in Europe, but that has played out in human history many, many, many times.
Mm. Thank you for that very sobering insight. I think coming back to individual leaders running their teams and their businesses, I think the takeaway for me in what you just said is, what are your values, mores, principles, and are those front and center in the organization, your team, to help put some boundaries around any potential evil activity. And it could be evil activity in your organization. There's certainly psychopaths and narcissists who slip through the cracks and can wreak havoc in a business. But I think if we pay attention to those types of things, then I think we've got a chance to contain any type of that behavior. But also depends on who's calling the shots, I guess.
It does.
If we can prevent it.
But that's the definition of a defiant culture. You have a difficult time lying, cheating, and stealing in a culture that doesn't tolerate it. And you don't need a leader to not tolerate it. Everybody doesn't tolerate it. So it's self-governing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Marty, we've gone through a lot of territory, and I just looked at the clock and went, oh my God. I'm so sorry. I meant to keep us to time, but I got so immersed in your conversation and your observations. You have your first fabulous book out, nonfiction book, Be Nimble, Creative. What is the subtitle? Because I've only just wrote dot points, didn't write out the full.
Yeah, it's how the creative Navy SEAL mindset wins on the battlefield and in business.
Yeah, and it is really good. It's a really great book, clearly illustrated with practical examples in both the Navy SEALs and business on the ground. So I'd highly recommend it. And your next book, Be Visionary on Strategic Leadership, is coming out later on in 2022. Is that right?
Right. It's available now on Amazon for pre-sale, and it's going to be released the end of November, 1st of December this year.
Mm-hmm. And just before we clicked record, I spoke to Marty about your novels. You're a novelist. I'm so excited about that. I can't wait to go read your novels. Could you tell us a little bit about your novels?
Sure. So I've got 8 novels. They're 2 different series. One's a time travel science fiction series, and the second one is a series of SEAL novels, one character kind of evolving over time. The Time Warrior Sagas is the name of the science fiction series. I've got all my 5 kids and some of my 5 grandkids as characters in those books. I don't use their last names, I use their first names. I have 3 daughters and 2 sons, and so my 3 daughters are actually warriors in the sci-fi series. My daughter Tara, who's in Bronte, she's an Australian citizen and an American citizen. She's married to a great guy named Tom. She's in there as kind of like a shield maiden, swinging swords and having a good time in those books. So I started writing those books. I put my kids in them as characters, and then the SEAL books, I don't have any of my kids in the characters, but I have a lot of fun with it. I've been writing novels since 2017, and I'm actually working on the 5th SEAL novel right now.
Oh, I'm so excited about that. Can't wait to dive into all of those. So both those topics are exciting to me. Navy SEALs and science fiction time travel, right up my alley. So where can people find you and your work?
The easiest way is to go to my website, martystrongbenimble.com. My books are all on Amazon. I write the novels under ML Strong, and my business books are under Marty Strong. But you can find it all at that website, and it links straight to a point of sale at Amazon.
Fantastic. Marty, I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all your insight and your wealth of knowledge and expertise and great wisdom in terms of how you see teams, business, and the world in general. So thank you so much.
And thanks for having me, Zoe.
I really loved that conversation. It was amazing to speak with Marty. He has so much experience to offer in both the SEALs and in business, and reflections on conflict and war and humanity in general. Plus, he's a novelist, which I'm really super excited about as a budding novelist myself. So what to take away from this one? I like his observations around good versus evil, and that when you see a lot of bad stuff in the world, you can't help but come to the understanding that we all have evil within us, and some people let it out and express it. And there are things that we can do as leaders, as communities, as societies to help elevate the structures around us, to help contain those people and those expressions of evil. That's kind of like the first big insight for me. I think the second big one was close to home and more pragmatic around motivation. What is the mission focus? What is the mission focus of you and your team? And is everybody gelling around that? I think that's a critical component. The aspect of humility and being open as a leader and really appreciating the value of others is another piece that I'm going to take away and dwell on. And working on harmony. I love Marty's dimensions of harmony, working on being able to communicate effectively with one another, being open-minded intellectually, and being emotionally mature to self-manage your own emotions and understand what's going on with the people around you. I love those three elements of harmony. And I thought it was also curious about, my sense of team development was always like, get to know your people really well and develop strong connections with them individually. And he's like, not everybody's into that. I think that was a useful counterpoint to keep in mind, is not everybody wants to share everything about themselves with you, the leader. And not every leader wants to share everything about themselves either. So heaps of wonderful takeaways from this. I'm sure to be staying in touch with Marty. I thought he was incredible. And I'm really excited to hook into his novels and gobble them up. It sounds right up my alley. As always, this podcast is brought to you by our core program, Amplifiers, which is an advanced leadership training program for CEOs and senior leaders. And it is all about developing ethical, proactive, pragmatic leaders who want to make bigger and better results with bigger and better impact. If you're looking for a community of leaders that can be your sounding board, your companions along the journey, and have a place where you can take your leadership to the next level, to really focus on development and expanding your perspective to be a more influential, positive leader in the world, hey, this is probably for you. So check us out at zoerouth.com, click on programs and click on amplifiers, and you can find all about it. In the meantime, thanks for listening, and may you live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.